So good morning, good afternoon, good night, good evening, good middle of the night to everyone who's there. I just want to start off by saying, wow. I mean, what we're doing right now is totally amazing. I was thinking about this last night, that we take completely for granted these technologies we have that we use every day. I mean, the whole idea of a webcast is just a mind-blowing thing. If we were to start over today, if everything were to fall apart and electricity were to go out, we would not be able to put together all of the thousands of pieces of technology and inventions and discoveries and breakthroughs required to do what we are doing right now. I mean, there's people from all over the world tuning in virtually for free from thousands of miles away, and this is an amazing thing. And one of the goals of the book and the goals of a lot of my work is trying to reconnect people with how amazing a lot of the stuff is in our everyday lives and to understand how those things came to be. And so what I'm going to do for the next hour is, next maybe 40 minutes or so, well, time for questions, but I'm going to go for about 40 minutes, is to try to reconnect you with ideas and how they work and to re-engage your sense of how to make things by looking at stories for things that we take for granted and understanding how they came to be. Now, before I get going, there's a couple of shouts I have to give out there. I don't know if you guys realize this, but those forms that you fill out, when you sign up that you think no one reads, I go and read them. I'm that crazy. So I read all the comments you leave. I read through to see the names of people who are showing up, because you never know. It might be people I know there. So in the registration, there was a bunch of people who I wanted to say hi to just for signing up and supporting my work. Thomas Duff, who's written a bunch of reviews of my books, is a cool guy, writes some great stuff. Matt Conway at Frog, Henry at Rim. These are guys who've had me come in to speak about innovation, and I know they're listening. A bunch of people at O'Reilly I should call out. And then I took a look at the list, and there's actually some superstar famous people who decided to show up. It turns out that Bono will not be making it today. He called to say that he had some other engagements to take care of. And but there's apparently a party in Hollywood today, so Oprah Winfrey and Brad Pitt will be joining for brunch. They won't be on for another 20 minutes. But so you guys are in good company. You should feel good about that for taking your time listening. There are other cool people who are listening in as well. So briefly to talk about the book. So the reason why this webcast is happening is a new edition of the book. I actually make a living from writing books, and the goal of doing stuff like this is to help give people a reason to go and check the book out, either to check out the sample chapters or to buy a copy for themselves or their teams. So in this new edition, there's 4 new chapters that we've added to the book, and if you check out the sample chapter pack, there'll be a link for that we'll show later. There's 2 of the chapters are listed here. People's love for new ideas, the mythology around that, and creative thinking hacks, which is all about practical techniques for using creativity and finding your own ideas and developing them into things. The last 4 chapters are the ones that were added, and the goal for the paperback was to make the book more pragmatic. A lot of the book involves stories and debunking myths about history, and that's very useful and can be inspiring, but the biggest request I had was people who wanted, when the book was finished, they wanted more advice about how to convert those stories into action, and so that's what we've done for the book. So here you can see free chapters. There's 50 reviews already up on Amazon.com. And I'll give you another sales pitch for the book at the end. Otherwise, I'm not going to pitch to you. I just want to teach and tell cool stories. So that's my pitch so far, and then I'll hit you up again when we're done, right before Q&A. So the first story I want to talk about has to do with sliced bread. Now there's this phrase that people say about sliced bread. Whenever they talk about their inventions or something that they're working on, it's this sort of comical phrase people will say that the thing they're working on is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Has anyone out there heard this phrase uttered before? I'm looking in the chat room to see if anyone is actually listening to me. Oh, someone raised their hand and has used this tool before. Very cool. All right, very good. All right. Making sure you guys are awake and alive. Good to know that I'm not just talking to myself here. So that phrase, most people don't really know what that's about, because no one really knows. Most people don't know, well, when was sliced bread invented? And why was it such a big deal? I mean, if people were starving, they could probably eat the bread whether it was sliced or not. And so the story here is actually kind of an interesting story. There's this guy named Otto Rodwetter, and in the 1920s, actually the 1910s or so, he realized that there was an opportunity to help people save some time. In the pre-Depression era, this is an era before power was in everyone's homes, domestic convenience was an important area of entrepreneurship. Lots of inventions during this time involved trying to save people's time. And if you can imagine how inefficient things must have been then, they didn't have power for lots of stuff, this was a big deal. So Otto thought, well, if we could slice bread, that'd make it easier for homemakers to make sandwiches and things. It'd make it easier for restaurants to divide up their food when they're serving meals. And he set about trying to design a system that would automatically slice bread for people. So all the excitement about sliced bread, it wasn't about slicing. People had knives for decades and centuries and entire thousands of years. It was about automating the process. So he made a machine that could do it, and in the lab that he was working on, there was a fire, and his entire lab was destroyed. He had to start up again and get more money to put this together, and then in the late 1920s, he actually made an invention that worked. But the problem was, slicing bread turned out not to be as useful by itself, because when you sliced bread, it didn't last for very long. And people at the time were still very thrifty. They couldn't afford to buy bread and throw it out all the time like we do today. So the thing that became the important problem to solve was actually finding a way to wrap a loaf of bread that had been automatically sliced. Until that second invention took place, slicing bread was not a big deal. So Wonder Bread, which took off in the 1930s, actually took off because it was one of the first major commercial uses of this combo of two different inventions: automated slicing and automated wrapping of a sliced loaf of bread. Now all this sounds, I don't know, I find this stuff interesting, but maybe all this seems kind of silly or antiquated, and who cares about bread anymore? But this anecdote about sliced bread is telling for one major reason. It's a story that we tell today, we reference, that we have no idea what it means. We have no idea. And this is a common thing among innovation mythology, that we tell these stories, or we make these references to things, and we really have no idea what it means. We have no idea what the challenge was. We have no idea what the lesson to be learned is. There's just something we have heard said, and we repeat it. And we repeat it and repeat it, and we promote the repeating of things said in complete ignorance. And so, my goal here is to start getting you into the habit of asking questions about these things that you hear. These things that you hear about creativity, or about innovation, or about entrepreneurship, or about a tactic or a technique, and to start asking questions and saying, well, wait, who used this? Why is that important? What did they do? What went wrong when they tried to do that? Those are the questions that you can apply to almost any invention, almost anything you take for granted in your life, and all of a sudden it becomes not a myth and not a cliche. It becomes something where you have access to knowledge about how to replicate that kind of invention or discovery or creativity yourself. And so, in the same spirit, there's this whole pile of vocabulary that are often used in books and seminars about innovation that I think are just awful. These are words that we really don't need to say. They don't really mean anything. They're words that get tossed around without people even questioning whether the words have value, or whether these are even words that our heroes of invention, people like Da Vinci or Edison or Steve Jobs or the founders of Google, or whoever it is that you look up to as someone who you think has done work like you would like to do, these are not people who would use vocabulary like this stuff. And so one of the things that I do for fun, I'm kind of weird in this way, I like to dig up what did these inventors or creators or entrepreneurs, what did they think of their work while they were doing it, before they became famous for it? What did they write in their journals or in their notes? How did they describe their own work? And most of the time they use very simple language. They use words like problem and attempt or experiment and prototype and design. They don't use vocabulary like what's in this slide. This is the stuff that consultants use, or that executives who probably have never invented anything in their lives use. And so I caution you, one little bit of advice I give you right off the bat, if ever you're in a room and these words get used a lot, you should be very worried, Because the more often these words get used, the less likely the things these words are actually meant to connote is actually happening. So one of my favorites in this list is the word breakthrough. So the word breakthrough literally means breaking through something. So whenever someone says that to me, I have a breakthrough idea. I want to show it to you. I'm like, okay, what is it that you are breaking through? And they're often stunned by that. They're like, well, wait, why would I have to think about that? Well, you guys should think about that before you use that word. If you haven't thought about what you're breaking through, then your idea is probably more interesting to yourself than to all the people who you think should be excited about some random idea that you came up with. So whenever I go anywhere, one of the first things I do, if I'm invited into a company or an organization, is I just do a vetting of the vocabulary. If I'm in the room and someone says breakthrough, I raise my hand and say, what are you breaking through? If someone says game changing, I say, what game are you changing? Now, I took a look at all the comments that you guys left in the when you fill out the form. And this is, again, like, I'm crazy. You guys probably put this stuff in thinking no one reads it. And I actually read it. I find out all kinds of stuff that maybe I should talk about. And in looking through that list, I found a bunch of indicators here about the word innovation itself. The word innovation, when people ask, what do you have, when you were asked, what do you hope to have covered, a lot of these responses are kind of self-referential. That you want me to talk about innovation in practice, productive innovation, strategies for innovation. And I can look at that and go, I don't really know what that means. What does the word innovation mean here? It could mean 10 different things, 50 different things. That many of these responses were probably better if we forced you not to use the word innovation and actually try to describe in your own words what it is that you're hoping to get out of today. And I'll cheat. I'm going to give you some common ways to define the word that are more practical, that are easier to use. And so one of the things I wanted to do today was to blend in some questions from my blog. I offered to answer any question that anyone had that they wrote in. And so here's one of the questions that was posted on my blog. My organization is in a change process from cost leadership as the ultimate goal to product leadership as a strategy. Now that's a mouthful of a sentence. I mean, if someone said that to me, I would have to spend a good 5 minutes trying to translate that into simple language that I could understand before I could ever think to offer any advice about creativity or better product design or better management. That in big corporations, you tend to have this kind of destruction or obfuscation of clear communication. And before you ever worry about new ideas or big ideas or revolution, you should probably start by worrying about clear communication and making sure that when someone speaks, the people in the room actually can understand what's being said. So I'll get back to this issue a little bit later on. So the word innovation, fundamentally, basic advice, don't use the word. Don't use it. You don't need it. If you're forced to use the word, the definition that holds up the best is the one that's listed there. Innovation means a significant positive change. And that means it's an outcome. It's the outcome. It's the result. So to sit down and say, I'm innovating today, is kind of a broken metaphor, a broken model for thinking about this stuff at all. Much better to think that's an outcome. We want to have the result we want is significant positive change. If you use that phrasing, that sets you up to ask some basic questions. Okay, what does positive change mean? Positive change for who? For our customers? For which customers? Okay, what would positive change look like for them? What variables would have to change? Does that mean better mileage in our cars? Does that mean that our software should crash less? What does that mean? And then once you know what it means, then you can say, well, what is significant? A 10% improvement? A 30%? 50%? Now all of a sudden you're having a productive conversation that's actionable and not hung up in these weird abstractions like game-changing and breakthrough. Often when people say the word and I challenge them, I go, well, what do you mean by that? It turns out that they mean one of the 5 things that are listed here. It means that they want to do something cool, which means that's really about perception. They want to be seen as being innovative. They don't actually care about the positive change. They just want to be seen as being the kind of company or person that makes positive change happen, that's a PR problem. That's not a creative problem. Some people use the word, they think of it as a way to make money, that innovators are somehow supremely wealthy. And that's confusing too. Most of the major businesses in the world, or many of them, they're not particularly inventive. They just make better products, or they're good at competing in the business world. That's a different thing on itself. Often, though, when I ask people what the word means, they don't really know. That they're in an environment where that word gets thrown around a lot, and since no one challenges them on that word, they just use it to cover up for their own ambiguities about what they should be doing, or to replace the effort required to do clear thinking so they have something better to say. So talk is cheap. Thinking about this stuff only gets you so far, and at some point, no matter how much of the theory you understand, no matter how much of the history you understand, at some point you have to actually do something. And a conversation about the idea of innovation isn't really actually doing something. Putting together a flowchart or a diagram or a 30-step innovation process, which some companies do, it's not really doing anything either. That's an abstraction. Until someone actually sits down and starts making something, or designing something, or making a prototype for something, you're not actually doing any of what's really at the core of making stuff. So that's a mistake I see happen all the time. People want to believe that by reading a book or getting a formula, that it takes away the hard part of actually going in and doing work and making a prototype for something, picking a specific problem that you want to solve and committing time and energy to solving it. That's really what this result of innovation, significant positive change, it only comes from actually doing the work. No amount of thinking or talking will do that for you. So the second story I want to talk about is tough love. Tough love, some tough love about the world out there. And I pride myself in trying to be very honest in the stuff that I write and the stuff that I say. I'm not that bright. I'm smart, but I'm not super smart. And I write well, but I'm not a fantastic writer. The thing that I think is an asset, though, and is rare, is people who are smart and can write well, but are really honest. And so one thing to be honest about is that innovation is kind of a distraction. Most products and things out there in the world aren't really all that good. Good products that satisfy customers are rare. They're unusual. And so this means that the place to start for most people is focusing on, in your job and the thing that you make, getting really good at having consistently good results. That's probably way far ahead of where most people are in the kind of work that they do. Good is hard enough. And so when people hear this notion of invention and breakthroughs and whatnot, they assume that what they need is some super complex, sophisticated plan to get better. But if you look around the world and you're competing in a market, or you're working on something specific, and you look around at your competitors, you probably don't necessarily need something sophisticated or amazing to be the best or one of the best products out there, or one of the best bloggers about a certain topic. That if you actually look at what other people are doing, this notion of innovation, you don't need to start there. You should start by simply trying to get better and looking at who you're competing with. This philosophy of trying to simplify the view of the world in the sense of, well, maybe people are not that good and maybe there's a simpler way to succeed, this is not my idea, it's not my philosophy. It's a philosophy known as Occam's razor. Have you guys heard of Occam's razor? Anybody out there? So Occam, cool. All right, excellent. Occam's one of my favorite guys. Now, we don't know that much about him. I think he was alive in the 12th century, 13th century. He was a philosopher, he was a writer, and he had this basic philosophy that I am going to paraphrase, which is, if you have two solutions to a problem, or two proposed solutions to a problem, then the simplest one is probably the best one. So if you have two proposals, two ideas, the simplest one is probably the best. All things equal, the simplest one is best. And so I look at the world of invention and innovation and all the stuff that people get confused by, and I'm like, if there's a simpler way to think about this, which is look at what other people are doing, find ways to make something better, and get to work. That's a whole lot simpler. It's easier to remember. It's more tactical. It's more practical than worrying about innovation procedures and infrastructures and processes and making some elaborate program that's going to put together, a 20-point checklist and criteria. That all that stuff doesn't really It's way too complex. Occam would not approve of that approach to thinking about this stuff. The other way to apply Occam's razor to invention and to creativity is this. So the picture I'm showing here is the prototype for Doug Engelbart's mouse. Doug Engelbart is the person who gets credit for inventing the computer mouse. Now, when he put the prototype you see here together, it was probably the late 1960s, early 1970s. This is 15 years before the Macintosh, 10 years before, or 11 years before the IBM PC. When he put this together, it looked really weird. You show this to someone, even smart people, even people who were on the cutting edge of technology in 1968, when he showed this to them, they thought he was weird. They thought, well, this looks like, I don't know, it looks kind of like some kind of mousetrap, or maybe it's a transistor radio because it has a cord on it or something. No idea what this is. Looked entirely weird and strange. And there's this notion, if you go through the history of any idea, any big idea, and look at how it was, the response it got in the moment, people thought it was weird. People thought it was strange, including the experts in that field. Now, Occam's razor, the typical notion of looking at this, or thinking about this is, well, of course we think it's weird, because in the moment we don't know enough to evaluate this stuff. And that means it's really hard to predict the future. That's true. But the Occam's razor view of this, the simplified view of this, the useful use of this, is to say, okay, if interesting ideas or big ideas, at the moment they're first proposed, look weird, then one way to get better at this stuff is to have more patience for weird ideas. That sounds kind of strange, because we don't like weird ideas. We don't like, it makes us uncomfortable when someone tells us something strange or that challenges our notions for how things are supposed to be. But the evidence is pretty clear. If you want to get better at inventing, you want to be more creative, or you want to be, I don't know, even more successful, the history bears out that what you need to do is recognize that in the moment, the first time you hear something, the weird things, some of those are actually going to turn out to be the future, the big idea in the future. And postponing that judgment is what Occam would recommend. Finding a way to withhold judgment before you reject ideas. To keep them around for a while. Give yourself a second chance or a third chance to think about some of these things that are proposed to you and that are weird. Or the ideas that you come up yourself that you know yourself are weird. Keep those around. Give yourself more opportunities to evaluate them and to work with them and develop them into things. Most weird ideas are not going to work out. That's true. But it's among the pile of the weird ideas that a good percentage of whatever the future is going to hold for us, that's where they're going to come from. So the same thing is true. You can dig up dozens of these stories. When Google first launched their website in it was probably 98, 97, 98, 99, somewhere in there, they were laughed at. Who needs a search engine? Search engines can't make any money. That's what they were told by every major search engine of the time. They were told you can't make any money. It seemed weird to bother to invest in improving search engine results in 1998. They had trouble getting funding. For a while, anyway. So there's tons of these stories. You can go on and on and on about these stories. One other Occam's razor view of innovation, trying to divide this up and give you better definitions to work from, is to go out to the market for any particular thing and look at how many different flavors there are of that thing. We like to believe that there's one judge somewhere. There's some universal sense of goodness in the world, and that a good idea gets recognized by everyone as being a good idea, and a good invention gets recognized by everyone as being a good invention. But if you look carefully at any field, or any kind of thing, you find that even things that are popular, you can find a group of people who criticize it and say it was a mistake to do this, or a group of people who don't like the particular invention that someone made and became famous for. Innovation gets very subjective once you start looking closely at it, as what's a solution for one person may turn out to be frustrating or unpleasant or not workable for for someone else. Innovation is often a very relative measure of innovation is often best measured in relative fashion. And so you can look here. I mean, why does the world need 15 kinds of razors? I mean, Occam would be very, very upset about this. The whole notion of razors is about simplicity, right? That you can go into Walgreens or a supermarket, and you go to the if you go to the razor aisle, you find 60, 70 different kinds. And now they have four. Each one has 4 blades, 12 blades, 50 blades. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So it's useful, and this is more of a marketing or business framework for thinking about this stuff. It's useful to recognize that for any invention, there's going to be multiple perspectives on the value of that thing. There's going to be what you think, given whatever you do. Maybe you're going to make something for yourself. You have an idea that you want to pursue for yourself. So you're really the only person whose opinion matters. That's fantastic. That puts you probably more into the artistic camp, or someone who's doing something for your own pleasure, and maybe the world will get value out of it. There's a lot of those stories. People who made something for their own pleasure, it turned out other people liked it too, but they didn't really care. They were focused on something for themselves. But then, if you make something, and someone else is out there who's going to buy it, what do they think of this? What's their criteria for buying? The criteria for buying a razor may be they saw a cool ad on television that made them feel a certain way, and they're going to go and buy the product for that reason. Not because of the product quality. They think of it as an innovative thing. They think of it as an interesting thing. They want to be an interesting person, so they go and they buy the product. They feel satisfied. They got something that made them feel like they're cool. Okay. What do the makers think? The people who worked on these Gillette multi-7 blade razors, you can do a Google search. You can find it online. I mean, they published their research about this. To get to the 3-blade razor or the 4-blade razor, Gillette embarked on a $50 million research project to figure out how to compress those razors down to be small enough that they could fit into a cartridge and work reliably. They're very proud of what they did. I think it's kind of silly. I mean, arguably one razor blade would be good enough, but they're very proud of it. So from their perspective, they're innovative. They made a razor blade that could be sold for $8 that had more blades in it than anyone had ever made before. So their perspective is different. And then, of course, is what the market thinks. Does the product do well? Now, that may have less to do with whether the product is good or bad, but there's a market determination as to which products should thrive and which ones won't. Then lastly, there's what will historians think. And this is my favorite way to think about this stuff, because it forces us to realize that the things we invent, other generations will follow. Our children, our grandchildren, what will they think of this thing that we made? So today we're dealing with issues around energy and automobiles and gasoline. In 1915, 1920, 1930, gasoline seemed awesome. It was this fantastically compressed way to fuel stuff. We weren't thinking at 50 years, 60 years, the effect that gasoline would have, or the limited oil reserves in the world, or pollution. We weren't thinking about those effects. We weren't thinking about future generations. We were thinking about the now. And so there's many different perspectives. One of the things in the book that the book does pretty well is to try to give you a sense of the multiple perspectives that are required to think about inventing anything for anyone, and how different inventions throughout history have, how much time the inventors spent thinking about these different points of view. Now my third pile of stories for you, this is the sweet spot for me. This is about making. And the sooner I can get you or get anyone to go and make something, the better off you'll be. That's the fastest pathway to getting whatever it is you probably wanted or probably thought you wanted when you chose to tune in today, which is, how do you make more stuff? How do you have better ideas? How do you have more effect on things around you? And it starts by recognizing that creativity is best thought of as a kind of work. If you have 2 people, you have 2 managers, you have 2 designers, you have 2 developers, 2 writers, 2 anything, and one of them is more creative than the other, I guarantee you the person who's more creative is simply expending energy and calories that the other person is not. Or they've learned over time through expending energy how to be more efficient at coming up with ideas and developing them than the other guy. It took time and effort. There's no magic pill. There's no magic formula. It's a kind of work. If you tell me to come up with an idea for a book, I'm not going to just close my eyes and meditate and then poof, an idea is going to come to me. I'm going to grab a pen, I'm going to grab some paper, and I'm going to start writing down ideas. And a lot of them will be weird, a lot of them will be bad. I'll get stuck at certain times, but I'll push through and keep going. Its creativity is best thought of as a kind of work. So I have a picture here of a famous lab. Does anyone know whose lab this is a picture of? Well, you guys are good. Edison. It's actually Edison. I don't know who Lavoisier is. I wish I did. Maybe you can tell me later. But it's Edison. So this is actually a recreation of Edison's lab that was purchased by Ford. Ford purchased either the rights to or the actual structure of the Menlo Park lab that Edison had, and he moved it or recreated it outside of Detroit, Michigan on his estate. And so I was in Detroit recently. I was actually in here and took this picture. It's a fantastic place. If you look around, you'll see tons and tons of gadgets and chemicals and devices and tools. This is a place for work. Edison probably deserves the most fame. He deserves the most fame, not for the phonograph, not for the light bulb, but for creating a place where creative work could be done. Many of the inventions that he's famous for, the patents for them, have many other names on the patents. Edison gets credit, most people don't realize this, but he does get credit in the history books for being one of the first people to create a research lab, a place where people who were smart and creative could do experiments, show up every day, come up with an idea, try it out. If it didn't work, that's okay, you learn something and move on. And the place is filled with stuff, equipment and tools and materials that can be combined and recombined in different ways. Edison was probably a workaholic. Most inventors and entrepreneurs or artists that we know probably were or are. Not advocating that as a lifestyle, but he made a place where it was safe to do experiments. The whole notion of an experiment is a powerful thing to think about. If you want to develop an idea, you're not going to get it right the first time. No idea in the history of the world was achieved correctly, successfully, the first time. And so what he did in his lab was he told his people, go ahead, try it out. Do it in a way that if it fails, you learn something, and then do it again. Try it again. Try a different chemical. Try a different tool. Try a different formula. But keep going. He believed that creativity is work. There's no, sure, going for a walk or thinking about or taking a break or doing things that inspire you, that's important. But those are important because it will help motivate you when you're back sitting down at your desk or in the lab doing work. And so when people tell me, well, I want to invent, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to write a book on something, I say, okay, go make something. Do an experiment, make something. And when it goes wrong or doesn't work out, that's great. Then you give yourself the benefit of asking the question, what did I learn from this? What could I do differently next time? And then get started on the next one. But a lot of people are afraid to start. They have this notion in their head that somehow Edison didn't have to go through that Da Vinci didn't have to go through that Tesla or Ford or Gates or Larry and Sergey at Google, that they didn't have to go through that. They just magically had a complete solution come out of their brains. But you will not find a single story of any inventor or entrepreneur that was their story. Instead, they experimented. They started, they tried stuff, and we benefit from those experiments. Now, there's this fantastic article online right now that was just published in the Vanity Fair magazine about the making of Empire Strikes Back. And so these are fantastic pictures in here. Definitely check it out if you're a Star Wars fan, because these have the effect of revealing how much work is involved in making stuff that we never get to see. We see the finished product. We see the artifact when it's done. So what you see in this picture here is the famous opening scroll that takes place in all the Star Wars movies, where the text scrolls up the screen. It just seems like, oh, of course, yeah, it seems like easy to do today because we have PowerPoint. We just do an animation. Okay, great. But when the movie was made, this is 20 years ago, 25 years ago, they had to invent some way to do this. And it was not easy to do. They had to create this rig. You can see in the picture this rig. They had to come up with a way to hold the camera so it would move smoothly. This was a pain in the ass. Really hard to do. And if you dig into the making of anything, don't look at the back of the box. Don't look at the marketing material. But spend 5 minutes digging up how something was made, anything was made. You get a whole new perspective on what was involved to make it. So this picture here, showing a very famous scene, probably one of the most famous films in the history of cinema, but it's taken from a different perspective. You see about 20%, 10% more of what was actually going on there. And now all of a sudden you realize this entire thing was made. Someone had to create this. Someone had to make 1,000 choices about where all these little lights go and how high off the ground the stage should be. Where should the railings go? There's 1,000 decisions that had to be made here. And they weren't made all at once. Someone had to make a sketch, many sketches. They had a conversation, got feedback, got a new idea, more sketches, a mock-up, a prototype, more work, more experiments. And then eventually it evolved into this thing that was put together onto a set, and it was filmed on a particular day. We never get to see any of that process. We see the end result. And that confuses us. It's a distraction. It creates this sense that somehow these things just came out of nowhere, when in reality, with a little bit of effort, you can see this stuff was made in the same way that you would make it. Work, effort, experimenting, prototyping, trying stuff out, learning, and putting in more effort, and eventually refining something until it gets to the point where it's successful. Now, Apple comes up a lot in stories about invention and innovation, and they should. They make fantastic products. And they put a lot of effort into their design thinking and trying to come up with ways to simplify things and design them with a high enough quality that people can use them reliably to be happy and successful in their lives. But Apple, to criticize Apple, certainly from the perspective of an inventor, of a creator, of a maker, there's a lot of mythology and theater they generate about their stuff. So what you see in this picture here is the Apple store, the Mac store, it's called the Apple Store in Fifth Avenue in New York City. Most of the Apple stores look something like this, these grand pieces of architecture. And then when you go inside, it's these beautiful, wonderfully laid out, super clean, minimalistic displays of the products. The products are displayed like religious relics. They're just laid out in this perfect way. And you're given all of this motivation to see these things as mystical, wonderful, amazing things that came from nowhere. This is very different from the lab, Edison's lab. Edison's lab was kind of a mess. There's stuff everywhere. It's chaotic. It's uncertain. Things can be combined in 1,000 different ways. You have to go in there and there's work you have to do in the lab. Whereas here, we're made to think that somehow these things just appear. We walk into the store and it's just there. We don't get to see how many prototypes or mock-ups the guy who designed the iPod had to make. We don't see that here. We don't see any of the sweat or any transcript of the arguments that must have taken place between Jobs and other people about design choices. We don't see any of that here. And so when we go here, it's sort of a misguided kind of inspiration because it lets us think that somehow there's a magical pill, there's a magical answer. That this stuff can just appear if you just know the right thing to do or the right place to stand. And the advice that comes out of all the history and the core advice in the book, I mean, if you like where I'm going or the way I've been telling these stories so far, the core spirit of the book is to give you an arsenal of true stories about history and ways to think about the stories that inspire you not to wait around. Because none of the people who made it into the book waited around. The best thing you can possibly do is to go right now and start something. To go right now and make something. And not expect there to be some magical formula. So what you see here is another one of my favorite little backstory, behind the scenes making of kinds of things. This is actually a sketch that Van Gogh made for one of his most famous paintings. When you go to a museum, you rarely see the sketches and the prototyping work that painters do, but most of them did it. Certainly for major works, they did it. They'd go and sketch and prototype and basically do experiments to figure out how to get the painting right. So you see here, hey, this is basically a sketch. It's a prototype of this painting, Starry Night, which is one of his most famous paintings. One of the most famous paintings in the history of art, actually. One of the most well-known paintings that we have. We only see the final result, though. We always tend to think these things were done all at once in a magic burst of creative energy, and we wish that we like to believe that if we had that same burst of creative energy, all the work for learning how to mix paint or the sketching and all the time invested would be unnecessary, even though that's not true. So my last story for you, I have about 15 minutes left. My last story will take about 2 minutes, and I'll have 10 or 12 minutes for Q&A. Let's say that you bought into what I've talked about so far. Okay, great. Sliced bread, that was cool. Occam's razor, simple is good. Don't use innovation, that's cool too. I get it. I got to get to work. Creativity is best thought of as work. Okay. The problem is often we have to work with other people, and that creates some different challenges. So this quote, hell is other people, I believe it's from Sartre, a French philosopher, and he had a lot to say about existentialism and how we interact with each other, and that just dealing with other people is a real pain in the ass. So thinking about other people, there's 3 things that are rare, and this is my basic simple plan, my basic toolkit that I offer to people when they are working with other people and they're trying to make new stuff happen. I ask 3 basic questions. First, does your team trust each other? The people you work with on a daily basis, do they trust each other? Do they communicate well? When they ask someone to do something, they have a high reason to believe there's a high probability it will get done. If there's basic trust there, okay, you're off and running. You have the basic formulation of a healthy team, and you can try to do advanced or aggressive things. If your team does not trust each other, you have much bigger problems than creativity. And that's the first problem you have to solve. Getting along well with your coworkers is unusual and rare in this world. Most teams I go to, most companies I go to, most teams there do not work that well. I'd say maybe 1 out of 3, 1 out of every 4 teams is happy, healthy, and functioning with a high degree of trust. Number 2, second thing which is hard to get, are leaders who take risks. There's something strange that goes on in the corporate world in particular, that the people who seek out promotion often are not risk takers. They're people who like this sense of hierarchy to make them feel they're doing well. So they're actually conservative. They're good at doing what the superiors and what the people in charge are asking them to do. But creativity and innovation is about taking risks. It's about doing things people haven't done before. So the second thing is hard to get, hard to find, but it's essential, leaders who take risks. Then third, we talked already about Edison and the value of experiments. People who are willing to do experiments. So when you're working with other people, the essential things you need, teams who trust each other, picking a leader who is willing to take risks, and having an environment where experimentation and learning from mistakes, the interesting ones anyway, are true. Those are your conditions. Don't worry about Edison or Da Vinci or breakthroughs. Don't worry about any of that until these 3 things are met. And so a lot of my time, and I'm sure a lot of the time of other expert types and consultant types who get invited into places, is getting these 3 things sorted out. Even though the people who invite you in, or invite me in, are worried about breakthrough, blah, 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 their core problems need to be solved first. The other end of this is whenever you're in a team environment where things are not going well, where things are slow, or people are frustrated at what's going on, the simple plan, the simple tactic to use is to make the team smaller. I'd say about 60 to 70% of the time, that's a made-up number, but it's fun to say made-up number, 60 to 70% of the time, the problem going on, why creativity isn't happening, is there's too many cooks involved. There's a committee. There's a 10-step phased process by which an idea has to be vetted before it can be approved. So the first step then, if you're having trouble with your team or your coworkers or your division coming up with ideas, or prototyping ideas, make the team smaller. Give individual people more authority to decide for themselves what to prototype or what to design. That has to be the first step. Often people work the other way and they feel like if there's a problem, more people should be involved. But when it comes to creativity, it's the opposite. The more people involved means there's more people who can veto the following of an interesting or weird idea. So it works against what you want to actually have happen. So I have 10 minutes left. I want to wrap up and make sure I talk about your questions. So I've talked about 4 or 5 different key major points. Talk is cheap. All the jargon and language, avoid it. If you're in a place where that's going on, first step is to say that stuff less. Ask people what they mean when they use the word innovation. You'll improve the quality of conversation right off the bat. Second, big ideas look weird. You want to be more creative? You want to be more inventive? You have to give yourself more patience with weird ideas, including your own. Start keeping an idea journal. Write down the ideas you have. Keep them to yourself, but have a place where it's safe to have weird ideas. And then come back and look at them and play with them, kick them around, laugh at how weird they are. But some of those ideas, if you put them down, some of those ideas will turn out to have value. They will be worth following. But you'll never discover that unless you capture them somewhere. So keep a journal. Creativity is work. At the end of the day, you're going to have to put in energy. You're going to have to make an experiment, have to make a prototype. If you feel overwhelmed by everything else you're doing, okay, that's fine. Pick something small. Pick a small problem, a small question, but poke at it every day. 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day. You can find 5 minutes or 10 minutes every day to write something in your idea journal. Watch 5 minutes less of television. Everybody in the United States and much of the developed world can spend 5 minutes less of TV to write an idea down, or to poke one down, or start writing why you think you can't come up with an idea. Write it down. Just get started. Then with other people involved, there's some tactics. The book goes into way more details on some of these tactics, but it starts by recognizing you need a smaller group of people. Start with 1 person, 2 people. Let the weird ideas have a safe place they can be kicked around and developed. So one of the questions that came up in the list of things you guys put in the comments you wanted to know was what's new in the paperback edition. The book came out a couple years ago. It's now out in a new edition. What's in there that's new? Well, first, given it's a history book, I spent a lot of energy with a team of volunteers verifying all the facts and the specific references that are in there. So it's now a much tighter, much cleaner book. And we updated all the references, all the URLs in the book, all the notes and references and stuff. It's all been updated and cleaned up. Second, I should say, there's 4 new chapters. The biggest, most interesting one is Beyond Hype, which is a chapter. It's about 5,000 words, where I try to take everything within the book and convert that into practical use. What people can do when they put the book down, what they can do when they get back to their job, and just trying to take all the stories and giving them a way to resonate and stay with you. That's the first new chapter in the book. Then the other 3 chapters are about developing ideas. I talk more about the idea journal stuff in there. And, of course, how to stay motivated. It's easy to get inspired and excited, but then what happens the 2nd day, the 5th day, the 10th day? Now, I have to make a request here before I open for Q&A. If you thought what you've heard for the last 45 minutes was good, that's awesome. I'm thrilled that you even stayed listening to me for this long. But today is a big day for the book. This is its sort of launch day. It's the biggest PR opportunity I have for the day. And any mention you can make, even if just this webcast, on your blog, on Facebook, on Twitter, is incredibly important to me. That helps a ton. They may not buy the book because you mentioned it, but then if they see a mention somewhere else, there's a cascading effect for how PR works. That's incredibly important. And of course, today is the best day for me possible to buy the book. We're trying to see how high we can get the Amazon rankings for the book to go, because as it gets higher, it gets displayed more and more on Amazon. So if you're convinced there's value in the book, or you like what it had to say and you want more, today is a great day to do that. Here are the photo credits for the credits that I used, and with that, I'll open the floor for Q&A. What you see here on the slide, it may look a little corrupted. That first link is to 2 sample chapters that are available for free online. You can go and check them out. And if you dig those, please do go and head on over to Amazon and buy the book. There's about 50, maybe 52 reviews of the book up there. It's got a 4.5-star average, so go check that out. So I'm happy to answer questions. I'm looking in the chat room right now to see who's got the first question for me. Apparently the first link doesn't work. Hopefully someone at O'Reilly can post the correct sample chapter link, because I'm too busy trying to answer questions to look it up myself. I'm lazy.
Hey, Scott.
Yes.
Scott, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Catherine.
There are questions over here in this Q&A.
There's too much technology.
Okay, we have questions. We pulled out all the questions for you.
Okay, so Jeff DeCagna. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? I know you. It feels like there's a little bit of Kool-Aid being poured here. I don't agree that our use of the term innovation is the problem, but our understanding. So can we say that if you have clarity and you think about innovation, it's okay to use that language? Hey, like, you can use whatever words work. I'm just, from all of my experience being this guy who wrote a book about this stuff and travels around talking about it all the time, my experience is when I go into a room, the more often that word is used, the worse things will go. Is that always true? No. But as a rule of thumb, when I walk into a room, if 30% of the words used is involve innovation or game-changing or breakthrough, I know I'm in trouble. I know these are people who are probably not clear on what those words mean, and that's why they're using them so much. So I don't think of it, I think of jargon as Kool-Aid. I think of clear speaking as the remedy to a lot of the problems that people have and organizations have. Clear, Orwellian, simple language is really a lot of what I see is the difference between a healthy, creative organization and one that isn't. What's the role of open source in the innovation process? Well, here I don't know what the innovation process means. That's a singular phrase. I guess what you're saying is, oh, the questions have moved. Someone's moving my questions. Who moved my cheese? Let's see. Where did it go? Okay, that's open source is fascinating in that it's a Darwinian evolutionary promoting process that people can take an idea, if they like it, and change it up and publish it again or ship it again. And that's awesome. That's the way ideas work in the real world, in the abstract world. If I read a book and get an idea, I can take that idea and revise it and spin it in a different way and reshape it and apply it to a different problem. Ideas themselves are naturally, they get around. They're promiscuous. So open source, I think, promotes that. The thing about open source that's challenging is that because it tends to be so distributed and so incremental, it's harder to do some kinds of invention. There's yet to be a good open source movie that's been made, because open source implies lots of people are going to make lots of little individual changes and modify things, whereas for a movie or a symphony, or maybe for some kinds of software, not all kinds, but for some kinds of software, you want there to be a clear vision that comes through in every second or every screen that's involved. So open source is great, but there's some kinds of designs or inventions that open source won't necessarily help create. When you're in a situation when the team doesn't trust each other, what percentage of teams listen to your advice? Well, if the team doesn't trust each other, the advice I give them is largely about recognition. That maybe even them recognizing that that's their core problem, that will change the way they think about what they're doing. And instead of worrying about trying to come up with the perfect spec template, or trying to come up with the perfect process, which are ways to try to control other people's behavior, really, sometimes, their answer is, oh, I got to figure out how to trust Fred. Fred and I need to go into a long conversation over coffee where we clear the air and try to reset some groundwork for having a healthy relationship. So I think some of the time it affects change just on that level, that it allows them to focus on what the real problem is. How successful they are, given my advice, I don't know. Trust is hard. Relationships are hard. I don't know that any person giving advice on those things gets a high success rate. That's just difficult stuff. But at least they're focused on the right problem to solve. How many great ideas? Many great ideas are is another question. Many great ideas are based on existing. Do I, or how much does one need to credit the base product idea? Well, in most cases, you don't lose anything by crediting. So in my book, there's tons of references. There's tons of references, specific references. That's good. I'm like, hey, I got value out of this book or this website or something. I want to go and give kudos to them. That's cool. I also want to help my reader in that if they like the thing that I'm pointing to, now they can get more of it. So you should do it as much as you can. I think even in the business world, provided you're not violating a patent or you're not crossing over some kind of deliberate infringement, in today's world with social media and the web, those kinds of references actually provide value. You're pointing out to something else, to someone something else they might like or want to buy. So I think you should err on the side of more referencing, provided you're not annoying your customers with lots of footnotes and links and stuff. And maybe this is probably my last question because we're almost over time. Do innovative people have a more diverse social network, or do they have a loner mentality? I think one of the chapters in the book is about the sole inventor, the myth of the sole inventor, and digging up many famous people who we think worked alone and explaining why that's a misnomer, that even people who worked alone, they didn't always work alone. Someone taught them to read and to write and the basics of their field, so they certainly learned from other people. I think as practical advice, having a more diverse social network or reading in a diverse set of fields is definitely valuable because you find ideas that are status quo in one field but haven't yet been used in another. It's a very vibrant, easy way that innovation happens. There's a good book called The Medici Effect. It's about the Medici in Italy. Famous family, supported Michelangelo and other people, all about that effect, that you can take an idea from one group or one domain and apply it to another. So the more friends you have in different fields or different nationalities, ethnicities, different countries, all that stuff provides you a diversity of perspectives, and that can fuel finding new ideas that you can apply in your own field. So I definitely recommend that as good advice. So the last thing I'll say here, if you asked a question that I didn't get to, today on my blog, probably within the next hour, I'm going to post all the questions that were posted here, and I'm going to answer them. So if I didn't answer your question, you're pissed off at me, check out my blog later this afternoon, and all the questions will be listed there, including yours, and I'll answer it on the blog. But thanks for listening, guys. Please do check out the book, or at least mention you listened to me talk today, and it didn't suck, or it was actually good. And hopefully I'll see you the next time. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks, Scott, and I want to thank everyone else who joined us today. Let me grab that question too. So thanks, Scott. I'll give you a copy of the questions if you haven't grabbed it, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Let's make it a really great Myth of Innovation Day. I think it's a fun idea, and we can all make a difference in that. So thanks for joining us, and yes, we'll have the chat saved. We always do. It takes a little work to pull it, but if you want a copy of it, just email me at webcast@O'Reilly.com. And so I'm going to close out the chat room in just a couple minutes, and just want to say thanks to everyone, especially Scott Berkun, one of my favorite authors. Bye.